Hello, hello, everyone. Welcome in. Hope you're all having a great Wednesday. It is the top of the hour here, so we're going to go ahead and get started. I just want to welcome everyone to today's ISO, where we are joined with CLI, the Certified Languages International. It is a full-service language company specializing in interpreting and translating services. And we are joined with our speaker today, Scott Ostermiller. I hope I say that right.
Yep, close enough.
Also, the Senior VP of Sales at CLI. I just want to say I will be watching the chat for questions. If you have any questions or comments, throw them in the chat and we will get to those at the end. So hang tight for the end here when we get to all of those questions that you might have. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. And without further, I will give it over to you, Scott, to get us going.
Great. Thanks, Amy. I just want to repeat what Amy said. It really is an honor. We know how busy all of you are, and it's really an honor. I appreciate all of you making time to learn some more about language services. So thanks. With that, let's start with a little bit of an introduction. I'm Scott Ostermiller. As Amy said, work for Certified Languages. Um, I see now that I even wore the same color shirt today that I'm wearing in that picture, so I guess that you can recognize me. Um, I have been with Certified Languages for 2 years, but I've actually been in the language industry my entire career. Prior to joining CLI, I worked for a company called Sorensen Communications, which is the world's largest provider of sign language services. And I spent 20 years there, but through that time there was able to interact and get to know other broader service language companies like CLI and have been really happy to make the shift from sign language services again to all languages interpretation. We'll chat more about what those services are. Um, I want to talk a little bit about CLI. I know this feels a little bit like a shameless plug, but it applies, and so thank you. Certified Languages International is a really amazing company. We've been in business providing language services for 30 years. We are family owned, and we have no outside investment. We're actually woman owned and woman managed. Our CEO, Kristen, is the founder of the company. And what I love about it is that we are a very mission driven, value driven organization. So, what that means is we truly love that we are helping people, and we know that we are. And we make all of our decisions as a business on how do we do that? How do we help more people and bless more people? We are headquartered in Portland, Oregon, and I actually live in Utah. So, it's a little bit about us. What I have prepared for you today is only about a 30-minute presentation, maybe even a little less, and then we'll end with questions, just like Amy said. But I've tried to prepare information for you that is sort of just broad information about the language industry. And so I hope that you'll all leave today with a better feel for what language services look like and what things to look for as you're selecting a vendor. So we're going to talk about language overview in the United States, how languages are used. I'm going to talk to you about the different types of language service options there are available, the benefits of partnering with the right language provider, and then ultimately, how do language services work? And then we'll go through some common misconceptions that exist within the industry. So first of all, I think some of you will be surprised to learn that currently 1 in 5 people in the United States speak a language other than English as their first language. So in numbers, that's 68 million people across the country. According to the census data, there are 350 languages represented across the country, and of course, they're located in all 50 states. As we know, language usage changes state to state and neighborhood to neighborhood based on immigration, based on certain communities that adopt certain geographic areas in the country. But as we know, in every state, there is use of languages other than English. I think oftentimes we think of Spanish as the only language need that there is in the country, and that's obviously not true. It does represent a vast majority of language needs, but we thought we would show you some of the, well, the other top 6 or 7 languages that are used in addition to Spanish in the country. So to put it in numbers, Chinese represents about 3.5 million people. Tagalog is second with 1.7, and you can see Vietnamese and down. As I mentioned, this is not true in every location. As a company, this very closely represents our language usage, but we happen to have a couple really large customers that have really specific communities that service because of where they're located. So think of like large hospital systems, and there's a really tight community of a certain, a certain group of people. And so therefore our numbers are a little bit different than this, or our language is served, but we're very closely represented as just across the nation. Okay, so let's talk about the growth that this country has seen in its need for language services. Over the last 40 years, the number of non-English speaking individuals in the US has tripled. So just to give that some numbers, this is again census data. In 1980, 1 in 10 people spoke a language other than English, and that represented 23 million people. If we look at the 2019 census, it was actually 1 in 5, and that's 68 million people. So obviously the growth is, there's really significant growth in need for language services, and we can expect that to continue growing. Okay, so I want to just sort of do a little bit of level setting on the different types of services that are provided, but also the different names that we as a association of language companies, or just as a community, what we've kind of all agreed to call these services. And it's okay if you use different words, and it's okay if you intermingle these occasionally. Everybody does, but as in general, we call interpretation is the exchange of spoken or signed languages. So it's that real-time conversation between two people with a person helping facilitate that. That person we also call an interpreter. So that's interpretation. You hear people kind of commingle that with translation. As an industry, we're trying to denote translation as translating written documents. And so it's the written version of that. And same thing there. The individual that does written document translation is called a translator. And then lastly, there's this third group, which is just bilingual individuals. So a bilingual person is a person that speaks more than one language, but their fluency in the 2 languages, let's talk Spanish, for example, their fluency may not be equal. Their primary language might be Spanish, they speak some English, they're then bilingual. And vice versa, English and Spanish. And so that's how we consider that group of people. As you now have seen the general need for language services, the general growth of that need, and the different types of services, hopefully you are thinking about the types of services you provide, or perhaps see that there is a need for language services. But I want to kind of take a second to just understand more about who's attending with us today. And so this is the only poll question that we're going to do, but we're going to ask Amy to launch a poll. And what I want to do is know, what type of language services are you currently providing within your company, if you know, and be sure to check all that apply here. And we're just going to leave this up for 10 or 15 seconds and give everybody a chance to answer, and then we'll actually ask Amy to share the results. So just take a second to do that for me. Amy, whenever you think. I think we can share the results if you have them. So it looks like 25% of you use bilingual agents, 25% of you use remote interpreting, no translation, which makes sense, and good, about half of you don't use any language services. Great. Okay, then we have the perfect group for this conversation. So next, I want to talk a little bit about, these are some questions that we commonly get from businesses like yours, trying to figure out how they want to handle language services. And one of the questions is, hey, we have bilingual agents that handle our Spanish calls. Is that enough? So I want to give you a couple things to think about here. The first one is that that is only enough, maybe, to handle your Spanish needs. And as we've just shown you, there is a large need of lots of other languages, 350 languages in the United States. And so by using only bilingual agents, you're definitely limiting the number of people you can talk to in the number of languages they need to use. The next thing on the bilingual question is that, as I kind of already stated, bilingual agents are not necessarily trained in both languages. And so where this can affect you, or where this can impact a little bit, is that the different geographic vocabulary that's used around the country. A bilingual agent may only be familiar with their specific use of the Spanish language, whereas interpreters are broadly trained across lots of dialects and lots of different accents and lots of different geographic vocabulary. And so there's something to think about there too with respect to the language proficiency. The next one is, as you think about staffing call centers, and we're obviously in the call center business too for languages, like most of you I think are, or some of you, we actually advise people to staff your bilingual or your Spanish agents as close to maximum efficiency as possible. So what I mean by that is, we're all trying to balance these efficiencies. And so one way that you can handle this is to staff that efficiency level really high and then roll those calls over to English agents rather than trying to, staff it at the 70% efficiency or whatever the goal is, or 80%. So staff it higher, let that be a more efficient, more effective use of your money with less waste. Roll the rest of them to English, whether it's break time, lunchtime, or peak call volume, and then engage an interpreter on those extra calls. Okay, that's everything that I want to talk about with respect to bilingual agents. The next question we get is, well, what about machine translation, or what about Google Translate and AI? And the answer there is, while this has a place in our ability to have conversations with people, it is not effective for real-time communication in a professional world at all. It may and will get there in the future, but as of now, it's just not what it's designed for. Machine translation is being used currently in this industry for document translation. And it's had a huge impact on the industry in a beneficial way for, really improving quality and bringing costs down. But that's not true yet for interpretation. And again, interpretation, that real-time communication. There are lots of examples you can find online of really embarrassing and actually high liability mistakes that have been made by AI in the interpretation world. The last question that we often get is, well, we're not doing it. In fact, half of the people on this call are saying we're just not providing language services. What's wrong with that? And one question, or something I want you to consider in that. First one is, we've already talked about you're then not servicing some of your customers. Potentially half, a large number of customers you're not servicing. The second thing is, you have to think about what what happens in the case that you can't communicate with a person that doesn't speak English? And sometimes what happens there is that person, your customer, will grab one of their kids. And this has existed for decades, right? This has existed for as long as languages have existed, where you utilize somebody who knows the language or both languages. But there's a lot of we would ask you to consider what that does for that parent-child relationship. It creates a dynamic that we believe just isn't great. Imagine having a conversation, so you can use the doctor as an example. I don't want my children having to interpret the conversations that I have with my doctor. And I think when we're talking about finances, which are the conversations you're all having with your customers, it falls into the same category. This oftentimes, or all of the time, are not topics that we want to be using our children for, or relatives, or friends. So help us fix that. Okay. I guess lastly, on the nothing category, then we should also consider the liability that exists in not providing any language services. Certainly, obviously with ASL, this is very closely protected by law under ADA. Okay, so why should you provide language services then? The first one is there's an ROI. If you can talk to more customers, you will increase your revenue. I think sometimes people look at language services as it's just a cost to our business. Like how much is this going to cost us? And I would encourage you to look at that a different way, which is if we could talk to X% more customers, how much more revenue could we generate, or how much could we increase sales? The second one is a competitive advantage. We have worked with members of ACA that, because they were trying to bid on a new customer, they were bidding on an RFP, or they were trying to win an opportunity, and we helped them leverage language services, which they told us gave them a competitive advantage in winning a contract. It was something that other people hadn't thought of. It was a healthcare related collections, and they showed forward thinking by addressing exactly how they were going to handle language interpretation needs in their bid. And lastly, we talked about this because it's the right thing to do. Talking to people in the language they prefer to be spoken in, or they're only able to speak, is the right thing to do. And so if your company has DEI initiatives or just values around that, you consider that as well in making this decision. Okay, so we're already to an overview of how this actually works for you. So let's talk about that. It's actually really simple, and this works for both inbound calls and outbound calls, and I'll explain both scenarios. So we'll start with an inbound. So that's obviously the more common call center type environment. So on an inbound call, the way it works is your agent establishes a connection with a person who doesn't speak English. And so whether or not your agent is able to figure out what their language need is, it doesn't matter. The very next thing they do once they get into this call is they connect. You dial a telephone number, the CLI telephone number. It's an 800 number, or it's a number we assign your account, and you connect to an agent. And that agent is going to do a couple things. The first one is they're going to ask your agent a couple of questions related to what data you want us to collect. So what that means is you can create custom questions that we ask on your behalf. So they're questions like, what's the customer name? You may want to track your language needs on a per customer basis, of course. You may want to know, what specific account it falls under, or what even the customer's name if you want to track it to that level. And so our agent will ask those questions. They will then determine what language, and by the way, this process takes seconds, okay? They will then help determine what language is needed, and then they'll finally bring the interpreter into the call. So it's just a simple telephone conference call where your agent is obviously now speaking English, the interpreter is interpreting everything in real time in Vietnamese, and the person is speaking back in Vietnamese. So that's the inbound call flow example. There's also an outbound scenario, which is just as easy. And the way that one works is oftentimes you'll just start by connecting with CLI. So in the case that you know you're calling somebody who doesn't speak English, you can call us first. You don't have to schedule it with us. It's all on demand. You just call it, you call us, get the interpreter on the line, and then establish the call out. Or in the case that you call someone, and this is probably more often the case, you call someone and you didn't know that they don't speak English. You get an agent on the phone, you get a customer on the phone who doesn't speak English, and then you simply establish that call out to CLI just like you did for the inbound call. So we make that call out for you actually, and then, well, in that case, we're all already connected once you call us in that example. So it really is a simple call flow. And I want to talk a little bit more about how long all of this takes. So that kind of gets us to this myths versus reality. So the first misconception there is in this industry is that process takes a long time. So last year we handled millions of calls, and our average speed of answer was 7 seconds, so less than 10 seconds. The negotiation time of exchanging data is also seconds. And then lastly, bringing in an interpreter. So even if this adds, say, a minute to the overall call flow, as you can see, it's not as long as you might have thought. The next one is security. This is really important to us. And that is that we understand the sensitivity of the conversations. One, all of our interpreters are beholden to their code of ethics. CLI conducts background checks on all of our interpreters, and we create even exclusion lists if there ever happens to be an interpreter that you don't want to work with. We are really careful to get you the right interpreter that's right for your call. And then when any data we gather, right, we're careful with the sensitivity of the data and only gather what you ask us to and report that back to you. Calls can be recorded, and you can opt to have them not be recorded. And lastly, since often I think you work in healthcare, CLI is within HIPAA certification requirements and understands that world really well. The last myth, I think, a misconception, is that the interpreters don't understand our industry. They don't understand our language. We have complicated acronyms. These are sophisticated conversations. And so the reality of that is it does matter who you partner with. Choosing the right provider of interpreting services is how you resolve this myth. Interpreters need to be experienced in the industry. They need to be proficient in both languages, and they need to, they're what ensure the accuracy of these phone calls. Okay, so again, specific to certified languages, to CLI, the company that I work for, the way that we approach these partnerships is really unique. So first of all, I want to give you just a little bit of context as to what our experience is in this industry. Last year, we serviced, believe it or not, 4.5 million minutes related specifically to collections and finance. So that means, again, our interpreters understand this. They understand the industry. They understand the vocabulary. We are lucky enough to have a great relationship with Penn Credit. They were one of our introductions to this group and ACA, but we also service 9 other customers. I think some of you are probably in the call today. And lastly, when we have a conversation with you, we don't have sort of an off-the-shelf, one size fits all approach to filling your language needs. Whether or not you know what your language needs are, we'll ask you questions to help get at that. Like, what if you happen to know what geographic areas are you serving, or what types of contracts do you have? And we can really help create for you a forecast of what your language needs will be. It matters to us too. Again, we're in the call center business as well. We serviced 240 languages last year, and imagine managing that many different call queues, right? So we understand the need for forecasting and predicting that, and we can work with you on all of that. A couple other things that are unique, at least in how we approach this, this industry. We simply charge for our services by the minute. At the end of the month, the number of minutes you used. So it's the way that you are paying nothing for inefficiencies. If you never use us during the month, you don't get a bill. We don't have any setup fees. There are no additional fees for evening or weekend calls. And as I've already mentioned a couple times, we are known within the industry for the number of languages that we provide. One of the things that we love about ACA is like this idea that there's this group of companies all coming together and you're supporting one another. We have that same thing within this industry, and it's called ALC, the Association of Language Companies. We actually sell to our competitors. So our competitors are also our partners. And I say that to say the largest companies in this industry choose CLI as their backup because they trust our quality and they trust our consistency. And I mentioned this once before, but our average connection time is 7 seconds last year. Okay, so that is the end of my slides. We want to do some questions and answers, but I'm just going to leave this slide up if that's okay, if there are any questions. So a couple things. You are going to receive some emails from us and Amy and Bruno and the ACA team. We're going to send a survey out to find out if we captured information that was helpful for you, if we missed things that you were hoping to learn. And we're happy to schedule individual conversations with any of you, whether you have a language provider or whether you're looking for one or never even thought of it. Please feel free to jot my email down, look for those emails, and we'll be proactively reaching out to you. So I'll leave that up there. Okay, what if I'm just looking at the chat now? Okay, Dickie McMath. It looks like her question, I think I just barely covered it. What if we only need the service a few times a week? Are we charged a minimum? No. You are charged no minimums. You're charged only for the minutes that you use during the previous month. Samantha, how complicated is it to get set up if we don't have a dedicated person to do it? That's a great question. Samantha, it's really easy. We have that introductory call with you. Oftentimes we engage, you'll include us with contact center managers, the people who manage the call centers. We have a conversation about how they want those calls to flow. There are automated ways to do that make sense in really high volume scenarios, and in low volume scenarios, we'll just talk through with them what this looks like. It can just be as simple as, here's the 800 number we want you to call when you need an interpreter. And from there up to all levels of SIP connections, which is the automated connections for data exchange. So based on volume, based on the complexity of your network, we help you through all of that, and there's no fee for us doing that. Thanks, that's a great question. Chip, is over-the-phone interpreting the only on-demand service your company offers? Great question. So over-the-phone interpreting is the one that we spent the majority of the time talking about, but there's also video interpreting. So video interpreting is what is obviously always used for sign language communication. There is no way, I know this is obvious, there is no way to conduct sign language interpretation without video. So as you want to speak to your deaf clients, we help you enable that. We help you comply with the law. none of you selected in the poll that you use translation services at all. We also offer translation. So in the case that you want to expand into a different geographic market, or you want to create some custom mailers or literature for any non-English speaking people, we can help you translate those documents as well. And another one from Dickie McMath. Is there an annual contract or month-to-month agreement? No, and I think we talked about that. Okay. I think we got through all of the questions, and we got through all of the content that I had come prepared to present. Are there any other questions that anybody wants to jump in with? And if not, Amy, I think we'll finish early.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Scott, and everyone for your great questions and this awesome presentation. This will be available by recording if you want to reach out to me if you missed anything. My email is ilka@aca.org, acainternational.org, excuse me. And without further ado, I'll give us the rest of the day to get finished with our tasks. But thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thanks, Amy. Thanks, everybody.